Bravo.
Bravo, yes.
Thank you.
Of course. All night with you.
And you fulfilled that promise the following year by giving an extraordinary performance in Hitchcock's Marnie opposite Sean Connery. I would encourage all of you, particularly having seen this, to see that film out. It's a very underrated, misunderstood film that came out that is now, I think, in subsequent years has acquired an enormous following and certainly a great admiration. And I think the performance is just wonderful, wonderful. Yes. Playing a very complex, complicated character opposite Connery.
That film was not accepted very well when it first came out because of the fact that all those years ago, even psychiatrists really didn't understand how serious it was when a child had a traumatic experience and it wasn't dealt with right then. And what the ultimate, how it manifested itself in that child's later years. And it wasn't well accepted, and the same critics who wrote about it at that time gave it a negative kind of critique. 20 years later, 25 years today, it's like a completely different movie.
It is. I mean, just even the use of painted backdrops, which were criticized at the time. Yeah. Now you look at it and say, well, he had a definite intent. But I don't think people are that familiar with some of the other acclaimed and formidable directors we've worked with, including Charlie Chaplin in Comes from Hong Kong, and Alexander Payne in Susan Ruth, and David O. Russell in I Heart Huckabees. And I want to ask you about working with those today as well. And you even did a TV remake of Hitchcock's Shadow of the Doubt. But one of the things about your life and career that has impressed me the most was your incredible work doing a humanitarian causes and relief work, going to areas that were hit by natural disasters, and particularly the work which is close to my heart in animal rights and with the Roar Foundation. And if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, the humanitarian efforts were with an organization called Food for the Hungry. And I had the most extraordinary experience for about 5 years of being a volunteer for them and going around the world helping people who had had their lives decimated by an earthquake, a hurricane, a flood, war, so many instances. And with the war in Vietnam, when Saigon fell, and so many Vietnamese people were trying to get away from communism, and they got in those ridiculous little boats to try to get to freedom. And Food for the Hungry leased a battleship from the Australian Navy, and we went around. We sailed around the South China Seas, helping the boat people. And bringing them on board. We couldn't keep them on board because of international laws, but we could give them fresh clothing, food, repair their little boats, those ridiculous little boats. But what we could do was guide them to safe haven, which was fabulous. And some of the people that we rescued contacted me when they got to these states, and one of them I was able to include into the plan that I had for some of the women that we helped outside of Weimar, California, at a place called Hope Village, where we had leased an abandoned tuberculosis sanitarium. And I don't know how many hundreds of Vietnamese refugees we helped find a job, and just find their way through a supermarket, because they didn't have supermarkets in Vietnam. And I brought in seamstresses and typists and people to helped these wonderful women find a job. And they loved my fingernails.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, they did.
You're the one. Yeah.
Yes, they did. And so my manicure.
You brought in that point, right? Like of like having these ladies like come into America and have fine nails is because of you, correct?
Yeah.
That's what I think. That's what I've heard. That's what I've heard anyway.
Anyway, I asked my own manicurist to come up from Los Angeles to give these women a lesson, of course, in doing one of the then popular manicures, the Juliet manicure. And she'd come up once a week, give the lesson, and they'd all practice on each other, they'd practice on me. And at the end of the 8-week course, we got a rented bus and sent all of these women down to Sacramento to beauty school. And they all passed the test in English, and they got their cosmetology licenses, and I am responsible for all of the Vietnamese manicures. It was an amazing thing, and I have so many wonderful, wonderful friends because of that. It's not nice work.
And the animal rights too is
The work that I'm doing with the big cats.
the War Foundation, yeah.
I did 2 films in Africa in 1969 and 1970. And during those years, environmentalists all over the world were saying, if we, people of the world, don't do something right now, I mean then, to save the wild animals by the year 2000, they will be gone just because of encroaching civilizations, 400 encroaching. And my then husband was a producer. So we decided to do a movie, and kicking around ideas about how to do this film, that answer came very quickly when we went on a photo safari to Mozambique. And on the Gorongosa Game Preserve, there was a house that had been abandoned by a game warden because it flooded during the rainy seasons. He moved out. And a pride of lion moved in to this house. I mean, it grew to be the largest pride in all of Africa. There must have been 25, 30 lions of all sizes living in that house. They were sitting in the windows like great portraits. They were going in and out the doors. They were napping on the verandas. A couple of them were having a little argument. The cubs were playing out in front. It was candy for the eyes, but you didn't dare go near those lions. But we thought, perfect movie set, animals of which most people are either enchanted with, think maybe scared to death of, which is smart, or we want to coochie-coo and tickle their tummies and hug them, which is not a good idea. So we got back to the coast, the script was written, and because of the instinctual dictates to fight an animal they don't know, none of the trainers of these Hollywood acting animals, which we wanted to use, would let their cat work because they didn't want their cat hurt, they didn't want to be hurt. Get your own animals to do the movie. Well, that's a romantic notion. Lions. Great. So that's what we did. That's what we did. And started out with little cubs, and so they came to live in our house in Sherman Oaks. Well, that's illegal. Pretty soon we had 7 of them living in the house. And as they grew, and they grow like you're blowing up a balloon.
You still do it, right? Miss Hedren,
No,
you
we
still
don't.
have like a reserve, no?
Yes.
You do?
We're in the Q&A period.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
And, well, going from lions back to birds, when you see this film now, many years later, what are your impressions? What impacts you the most when you see the film?
I think that most of all, how well the film holds up. Still, I mean, it really is amazing. I know a couple of times I've been in theaters where watching it. And the times when I pick up the telephone, people would start to laugh. Like, what kind of phone was that? How long ago was this movie made? Because the film, you can't really tell what year it was made, excepting for little things like the telephone, which of course is silly now. Hitchcock had a way of really making time not an important issue in his films. And he was brilliant at it. But he was a brilliant director, brilliant producer, brilliant, faces.
Yes.
Making a motion picture.
Yes, absolutely. Let's open it to some questions from the audience, and I have a couple that I'll interject as well. Yes.
I wondered how, when you made that film, how did you do the birds? I mean,
How, what do you
was
mean,
that
how did I do the
similar
words?
colors?
You mean when they were attacking me and all that sort of thing? With great difficulty. When I first read the script, I got to the ending and I said, Mr. Hitchcock, why would I go up those stairs? Knowing what has happened to the people in the town, the school children, right now there are birds all around the house which we have boarded up. Why would I go up there all by myself when I hear these sounds? And he looked at me like he never thought of that question. And his answer was, because I tell you to. Okay, fine, it's a movie. So my next question was, and when I open that door and all the birds come flying at me, how are we going to do that? And he said, we'll use the mechanical birds like we do with the children. Fine. You know what? They all lied to me.
Oh my God.
They all lied to me. Not one person said to me, not even my good buddies, said to me, that scene at the end, watch out. Nobody. It wasn't until the morning, it was a Monday morning, that we were going to start that shoot, that scene. And I was in my dressing room on the set, little building. And my little buddy Raven was in there with me. And he was the sweetest Raven, and the bird trainer wouldn't teach him how to do all those nasty tricks. So he'd be playing with my makeup and sitting on my shoulder and sitting on my head. Anyway, the assistant director came in, the first AD, and he couldn't look at me. He looked at the floor, he looked at the wall, he looked at the scenery, and I said, what's the matter with you, Jim? And he said, the mechanical birds don't work, we have to use real ones then. Out the door. And I kind of blanched white. When I went out to the set, there had never been a thought of using mechanical birds. There wasn't a mechanical bird in sight. However, there was a cage built around the door that I come in, and there were 5 cartons about this high, about that wide, filled with raven and gulls, 2 pigeons thrown in, trainers with gauntlets up to their shoulders, and in which they hurled birds at me for 5 days. On Wednesday, Cary Grant came over to the set, and he came over, walked over to me, and he said, I think you're the bravest woman I've ever met. Yeah. I just looked at him like, oh boy, it's my paycheck.
Steve Sklo, who's the chairman of our film department at UCF, wanted me to ask him this question. He said that Truffaut had written the there was a scene, a love scene between you and Matt Taylor that was shot that Hitchcock never used in the film. Is that so?
Yeah, it was very sexy.
Well,
No, I don't remember that.
oh,
Maybe that was a secret between Truffaut and Hitchcock.
could be, could be.
That could be.
Yeah, because there's a moment in the morning where you come down and kiss each other, and there seemed to be, something missing that, maybe a scene that we hadn't seen.
Yeah, it was a scene you hadn't seen.
Yeah.
I didn't see it either. I wasn't involved.
Somebody had a question, yes?
Ms. Hedren, it's such an honor. I love your performances in both of those films. Hitchcock was known to have, not to enjoy filming. What? Oh, I'm sorry. He was known not to enjoy filming itself. He always said it was finished before he ever went to the set, implying kind of that he was bored with filming. And also that he didn't allow spontaneity. He had everything planned. But there's at least one book out that talks about, that refutes that, and says that Hitchcock did enjoy it, and he was more creative on the set than he would admit. So I'd like to hear you, if you have any stories about that. Did he change the script? Did he allow some leeway?
Hitchcock was extremely organized. In fact, I think he's probably the only director of, I would assume, very few that worked from 9 to 5. At 5 o'clock, we had our night shot. And he was on time with his shooting, everything, but he had everything so well planned. He would do diagrams of it, of the day. Everything was, he really said, by the time we start filming, in my mind, it's done. And it was, everything was so perfectly mapped out in his mind as to exactly what all of us would do. It was an amazing thing, and it was amazing the way he directed all of us. And in fact, the way he directed me, because The Birds was my first film, so I was a novice at this. I did a tremendous number of commercials, but doing a commercial does not give you any indication of how do you develop a character. How do you look at a script and build it into the understanding of the different relationships between each of the characters. I mean, there's so much in becoming an actor. And he was my drama coach. And it was done in such a subtle manner. It was all done by discussion and reading over the script and discussing the characters. And by the time I got onto the set, I understood completely. And it was really a unique way of directing. But he did have it so planned out, so very, very well planned out. It spoiled, kind of spoiled me for working with other directors. And that could go into the Chaplin thing, because when I was working with Charlie Chaplin and Sophia Loren and Marlon Brando and Sidney, his son Sidney, it was hysterical because, and Marlon Brando did not appreciate all of this, because when we get onto the set, Charlie would go out onto the set and he would act out Marlon's part. He would act out so that he would become Sophia Loren's role. He would become my role. And he did such a good job out of it. And then he'd say, okay, now you do it. And that was his direction. Well, Marlon Brando wanted to quit. But getting back to Hitchcock, there was, it was not only his dealing with the characters of the plot, but knowing everything about that motion picture, how it would work, how everything would be so perfect, and he was perfect at it. Absolutely perfect.
If I could just follow up with that question and your response. I worked in 2 different movies that I wrote, with one with Kim Novak and one with Tony Perkins. And Novak from Vertigo, of course, and Perkins is Norman Bates. And I would drive him crazy asking about working with Hitchcock, because I liked Hitchcock. And Novak, although they both spoke very fondly of their experiences, Novak would say that he was very specific and knew exactly what he wanted, and would tell her to work in a certain way. Whereas Tony was said Hitchcock gave him more flexibility to create his own debates. And I'm wondering if you saw any distinction between the way he dealt with male actors and female actors on the set.
I really wasn't privy to that. I really don't know. There was practically no direction given on the set. I mean, we all knew what we were going to do. And so all of the direction, as far as I was concerned, was in private sessions of character scene and how it would play out with the other characters. But it wasn't like getting onto the set and working it out then. It was all worked out before we got to the set.
And the script too.
Everything.
Right.
Yeah.
That must have been remarkable, just your first two films with Hitchcock and then going on to Chaplin. What about the more contemporary directors, like Alexander Payne and David Russell?
Alexander Payne is, I think, genius. Absolutely.
David Russell.
David Russell's nuts. Crazy. He's crazy and wonderful, and I love working with him and enjoy watching him. And I often wonder, how is he going to edit this? Because we'd be working on a specific, when you're involved in these films, you know how they're written to be so that they can be edited, when they're filmed, so that they will edit correctly. And all of a sudden they would say, no, we're not going to do that, we're going to do this, we're going to change this. And I'm going, oh my God, how is this going to work? And he does. He's brilliant. He is brilliant.
But two disparate approaches to from Hitchcock.
Yes.
But, yes.
As the story goes, is that Hitchcock chose you because he wanted an actress who was like Grace Kelly. With all due respect to the memory of Princess Grace of Monaco, I felt she paled by comparison. And I also feel that it was an astounding performance, rendered all the more astonishing by the fact that it was your debut performance.
Yeah.
But your skills as an actress are only superseded by your dedication and effectiveness as an animal rights activist. You have my undying respect for that. And my question to you is, about 15 years ago, I heard a radio interview with you in which you were saying that you were growing weary of the necessity of raising, at that time, $50,000 every month to maintain your Shambhala preserve. And I was wondering if it has gotten any easier for you, if any other people have stepped in to help you, and if you're still finding that a difficult challenge.
What an incredible question. It is now not $50,000, it's $75,000 advertises to $1 million a year, and I'm having a very tough time raising the money, especially now. I mean, so many people think I'm a very rich woman, because I did 2 Hitchcock films and a Charlie Chaplin film. I have to tell you, when I did The Birds, I made $500 a week. And you know what? When I did Marnie, I got a raise, $600. And you know what? That money's gone. And, my daughter is rich and her husband is rich, and that doesn't equate to our situation. I am desperate right now because right now we have 47 big cats that we have on the preserve. In the 80s we had 150, and right now, in order to take more animals in, I need $1.2 million to redo the compounds, because they're big. We don't have them in little tiny cages. They're in acres of land, and
believe that if everyone here, all of whom appreciate you, would take it upon themselves to do everything within their power as individuals in their various fields of endeavor, in their various avocations, to spread the word about what we just expressed right now, especially online and through their business endeavors and their charitable endeavors, I think we could exponentially increase the help. Just for this crowd here. I mean, one person can affect thousands of people, and I would hope that we would all do that. I know I will.
And I will just give you our website is Shambhala, SHAMBALA.org, and we give all the information of what the needs are and what I'm working on. But I do want to tell you that I have not stopped with giving a home for life for these animals, but I'm trying to get federal bills passed to stop the breeding. I've been successful in getting a bill passed in 2003, which I brought to my own congressman. I did this, put the bill together, brought it to Buck McKeon, 25th District in California, and that bill is to stop the interstate traffic of lions and tigers. The bill was passed unanimously in the House and Senate, and Bush signed it on December 19th of 2003. It is in use. It is working, and right now, at this very month, the other bill that I brought to my Congressman Buck McKeon about 4 years ago, but the climate wasn't right, and that is to stop the breeding of the exotic feline forever in the United States. It is right now going to be introduced this month. The title is Big Cats Public Safety Protection Act. And it was introduced last September, but then there was the election and Benghazi and Christmas, and so the bill rolled over into this year. And hopefully it will be introduced this month. And so I am not just trying to put a Band-Aid over this horrible situation of these big cats being born in captivity to live in prison for the rest of their lives. I'm trying to stop it. There have been so many children and adults killed or maimed for life because of these animals, these magnificent animals who are literally serial killers. And our government has always said, sure, breed them, sell them for whatever, use them for shows, circuses, whatever. And it's wrong. There's not one thing that we can give a wild animal in captivity that they need. What they need is to be born free, to live free forever. And it's time for us to speak that way.
Before I just want to add, your daughter, for those who may not know, is a wonderful actress, Melanie Griffin. So, yes. And Tori Griffin.
And my granddaughter, Dakota Johnson.
I was curious. Hi. Your character.
He's coming. She's coming.
Thank you. Your character in the movie was named Melanie, and you have a daughter named Melanie. Just curious to know if there was any connection with that.
My daughter was 4 years old when I did the film, and when I was given the script, I don't think Evan Hunter knew that my daughter's name was Melanie, so there is no connection.
And I was just curious also to find out when you were motoring the boat across the lake, was that all your work? It seemed to me to be very difficult.
That's a funny question because, there's a line in the movie when I'm talking to the postmaster, and he says, have you ever operated a motorboat before? I said, of course. And Peggy Robertson, who was Hitch's assistant, when we were in the first talking period of the script, we were going through that part of the script, and she said, Tippi, do you know how to operate a motorboat? I said, of course. I had never been in a motorboat, and honest to God, it was the luck of the gods that I was able to carry that off. It really was. I had not done it before, and I watched all the men who were operating the boat and how they started it and how they did all of that. And thank you, I did it.
Thank you.
Don't.
She wants to.
Oh, the
It's a simple
microphone.
question.
Oh.
You remember what kind of sports car it was? Was that you really driving, speeding on the highway?
It was really neat, yeah, it was, and I tell you, I had a great time doing it.
What kind of car was that?
It was English, and it was the
Aston Martin.
Aston Martin. Yeah, who said that? There you are, thank you so much. And I love that car. I love that car, and I love driving it, and we had a horrifying experience for everybody but me. We were up in the mountains, you know, those curvy roads, and they had it parked, and there was a really deep drop-off up in the San Francisco area, you know, getting to San Francisco. And you know, when you're driving a clutch car, sometimes they back up before they go forward. Well, I get in the car to start speeding off, and it goes backwards, and the whole crew went because they thought the car was going to go over the cliff because it was so close. But I love driving that car.
Up in the back.
My question is, what did you take from Alfred Hitchcock? What's the one thing that that you learned from him that you've taken with you?
I think the one thing that I took from him was all of the information that he gave me about acting. I will use every one of the aids, of the thought processes, all of it. I've used all of those techniques throughout my career, and they've been invaluable, absolutely invaluable.
You know, there's the adage that he treated actors like cattle, they thought of. I mean, I think it's artful, but I would think that he would treat actors with respect from everything that I've read and heard.
The only thing I saw was respect.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Gentleman, like in front.
Microphone's coming.
Mike, done it. Right here, right here.
Hi, Ms. Hedren. I'm just curious, when you're working with Rod Taylor, it's so hard to get great chemistry together, and obviously you two are wonderful.